of talking to the Special Operations Medical Association about our work. But it's all been kind of a blur. But we went in mid-March of this year on our 7th trip, and then just got back, did about 6 weeks in country. This is a picture actually taken from a training that we did at a dedicated medic training base out on the western part of the country. That really, to me, encapsulates a lot of what we're dealing with out there, which are miserably cold conditions a lot of the time. This is actually the exit to a trench, and then guys who are poorly equipped and, generally speaking, not necessarily medics doing a lot of the treatment out there. I do love starting with the fact that Ukraine is a beautiful country. I think we get very much ensconced in the news here, which makes it all look terrible all the time. And in fact, it's very much not. I'm sure Mike recognizes some of these pictures. At least one of them was taken in his hometown, maybe 2 of them. And we're just there. Did all the same things we did with Mike back in September 2022. But this is one of my favorite places. This is the Opera House in Lviv on the western part of the country. But just a fantastically beautiful country and filled with amazing people who really, at the end of the day, just want to go back to doing whatever they were doing before February 2022. Mike worked at a great French restaurant in Kyiv, probably one of the best I've ever eaten in. And all of our interpreters and all of our friends who live and work there probably just want to go back to what they were doing. Maybe except Vic, who was a teacher, but I'll let her tell you about that. But it's also extremely tragic. This is the main square in Kyiv. This is all memorials to guys who died. This is just another angle of it. This is the Veterans Cemetery in Lviv. And as you can imagine, over the past couple of years, this started as a single plaque, and now the entire place is covered in flags and memorials. This is a family that was killed in a missile strike on their apartment in Lviv. This is Emily when we responded to that. So it's a very challenging country as well. We do like opening with this because I think we hear a lot about Ukraine, and especially the circles that we deal with, unfortunately, with the DoD. We're not really good at understanding actual problems. So first off, it is Ukraine. For people who still love calling it the Ukraine, it is not a region of a larger country. It is autonomous all on its own, and it's the second largest country in Europe, second only to the people to its right who are doing bad things. But it's about the size of Texas, and that matters because you can't fly. And so for those of us who come from here, we ultimately fly into Poland. We all live in Denver, or Colorado area, so we fly from Denver, except for Nick, who decides to live in the mountains, into Germany. So that's an overnight flight. I know most of you have done that or something like it because most of you have worked overseas. So that's one night. We then go to Poland. We've always landed in Krakow. We wait a night there to make sure that, Charles de Gaulle or whoever has our luggage didn't lose any of it. Get to Krakow. We spend a second night there, so that's 2. We then take a train down to the border and then get on another train after making approximately a 800-mile walk with our bags. Yeah. So part of being on our team is, can you carry 300 pounds of gear across a train terminal? But then we go from the border here all the way, usually out to Dnipro, which is 19 hours. That's also another overnight train. So that's 3 nights right there just to get here. We spend another night here, 4, get in a couple SUVs, then we head out east, generally speaking. So part of the problem with maintaining any sort of presence out there is if I've got an ER doc or somebody who wants to work with me and they've only got 2 weeks off, I've just spent 5 days just getting them where they need to be to do the work. And so maintaining a persistent presence out there is very, very challenging. It also, if you think about if any of you did logistics or manning or movement of any kind, most of the front line is kind of in this crescent right here. So if you can't fly any of your equipment forward to rearm your troops, and if it's all got to come over land, it takes time. And it's very, very hard. The tyranny of time and distance is very real because if you've got medics or providers who are working in this crescent, it's almost impossible for them to get off the line and attend any sort of training because they just don't have the time. So population of about 37 million, initially had about 8 million internally displaced people, about 5 million of whom have returned. And it extends, as we were talking about, 800 miles from west to east. So the problem, one of the big problems with Ukraine in terms of, for us, getting anywhere is that the biggest part of it is the distance we have to traverse, which is the distance from west to east. Independent since 1991, and that is a big deal. So if you think about the average age of the Ukrainian soldier right now is 42. if you've been free for 34 years, at least some of that schooling was done under a Soviet system. So when we do things like training, we have to overcome not just language and cultural barriers, but also a cultural barrier of a Russian scholastic system, which obviously changes the way you think. There's not a whole lot of autonomy. And when we tell people in the trench, you need to be able to make decisions, it's a very foreign concept to some of them because they just don't have that experience. They've never had that latitude, and it's never been something that's asked of them. It's a terrible war. I'm not going to lie. From those of us in the room, I know there are some folks in here who've seen a bunch of them. On the front lines, this is the worst thing I think I've ever seen, and certainly the information we get off the front lines. So we just went across the 3-year mark. We're now into the 4th year of what was supposed to be a 3-day special military operation. The front line itself is about 640 miles long. So again, if you think about things like manning or logistics or any of those things that you may try and do to plug gaps, how do you possibly do that? We talked about this with our DoD colleagues quite a bit, is how different this kind of fight is from the one that we've been involved in over the last 20 years. Russia is currently and have been, I mean, this slide hasn't really changed since the first time I gave it. We think about kind of 3 main fronts. Right up in here is the kind of Sumy Oblast, and you've probably heard about Kursk, which is where the Ukrainians did their incursion, which is just on the other side. You've got the Donbass, which includes Luhansk and Donetsk, which is where the preponderance of the fighting is. And then down in the southern area, you've got Kherson, Mykolaiv, and then the Zaporizhia power plant that everybody freaks out about quite a bit. That's all down here. And according to our friends who are on the front, Russia, every time we talk to them, is making pretty significant gains across all 3 of those areas. The other part that makes it challenging is, while this is the main part of the fight, thanks to the technology of drones and ballistic missiles, anywhere in Ukraine is a target. And the picture I showed you of the apartment that was hit, that family was killed, was way over here in Lviv, hundreds of miles from the actual front. So we were formed in March of 2023 to try and do our small part about this very, very large problem. And what we do is we provide advanced pre-hospital trauma training. So we take medics, ER docs, people who are good in terrible places and who could be good teammates when you're living in a terrible team house with no bathroom, and basically put them in place. We try and get the best possible people with the best possible knowledge and equipment to the people who need it the most. Because there's really a limited opportunity for the medics on the ground, partly because of that tyranny of distance, but also because of the pace of attrition. So rapid turnover of medics and troops. There are brigades that have told us they've lost 80% of their guys in 5 months. And so how do you replace that kind of turnover? And it's just impossible. You cannot rapidly produce anything, right? Anything that you guys have been good at for a long time, you're expected to be good at in days or weeks. There are no rotational cycles out there. So a lot of us who came up either through the military or through a similar community are familiar with things like Jort cycles, where you've got kind of a planning cycle, a deployment cycle, and then a rest and refit cycle. At least one of the medics we know, we trained him in July of 2023. He's been on position since then. He's not seen his family. He's not gone home. He certainly hasn't had time for refresher training. He's got lots and lots of on-the-job training. He's probably the most experienced medic in the world right now, or one of them, if not the other guys with him in Ukraine. DoD and the U.S. government, no official presence, right? And honestly, the official answer to people like us is you shouldn't be there. And if anything happens to you, you're on your own. The other problem is there's very limited organic training capability. A lot of the guys who've been doing this since 2014 died in the first 6 months of this war, and so it's really hard to replicate the normal set of folks who would be doing that. So then the preponderance of training falls to people like us, people like Kendra's organization that launched very early in the war, small teams. And there are some issues with that as well, because there's no continuity with that training that's provided. We feel it's really important to recognize, and we kind of talked about everybody, but this is kind of who we are. Paramedics, Kyle's an EMT, but really our course developer for some of the stuff that we're doing now with prolonged field care. Steve, who's in country, who Kendra also knows, he was on one of her teams. Amazing emergency medicine family practice doc who decided he wanted to live in Ukraine starting March of 2023. So we get him periodically in country. Our interpreter, we've got a guy who was with us on our first trip. Due to personal reasons, he can't go very much more anymore. So he kind of helps us back home. Put on another interpreter, Nick, another paramedic. Yulia is one of our interpreters. Lee is a British paramedic who also lives in country right now. Brett, who's not here, he's who I forgot earlier. But a paramedic and search and rescue specialist. Susanna is amazing. She's a Ukrainian doctor, anesthesiology resident, who is about to become a full-time doctor and will probably not be able to be on our team, which is disappointing. But what Susanna brings to us is a local knowledge of the educational system. So things that we wouldn't even think about addressing, like the fact that maybe not everyone understands anatomy and physiology because we all took biology, she addresses those things without even thinking about them because she came through the Ukrainian healthcare system and she kind of knows where those gaps are. And then on this last trip, we took another Yulia. She is a Ukrainian. She lives in Seattle now. But she's a mental health specialist, and that's a huge gap out there. And she was able to introduce some concepts, some very basic concepts as we were going. She was also with us on a couple of pretty interesting events for the team, and it was very, very helpful to have her out there. But in total, we've got about a combined 100+ years of medical experience amongst the team, 30+ deployments into theaters of active conflict, to include places like Afghanistan, Iraq, other places, and then most of us have been in and out of Ukraine since April of 2022. We train mostly medics. We train mostly military medics. And that's kind of a weird thing for those of you who came up to the aid community that have an NGO or a 501c3, which is what we are, so actively involved with Ukrainian military. But if you think about who's actually doing the preponderance of the service out there, even to the civilian areas, it's these guys. Right? There are no civilian services anymore in the Donbass, for example, or around Kharkiv or Sumy. The other piece of it is that when we think about the rebuild side, I know a lot of you came out of the aid, literally USAID organization, and we've talked to them. The future of Ukrainian pre-hospital medicine when they have to rebuild this whole system is probably in some of these pictures. That said, the reality is in some of these pictures, most of these folks are dead because that's how fast the turnovers happen. We trained these guys. This was actually a special police unit in Sloviansk. And not weeks after this picture was taken, we heard that one of them was killed on an operation. A lot of our training is kind of done out where we talked about, where the medics are. And so this was a prolonged field care exercise that we were doing, that we were told 4 hours before 4 hours before we launched it, basically, that this is what they would really like us to put on for them. It was a mass casualty prolonged field care thing. We were like, done. We can do that. Thank goodness Kyle was there. He's done a bunch of these. But we try and train like they have to operate. So kind of small unit, in kit. So think about this. If any of you have even tried to put like a Band-Aid on a 5-year-old, how much more challenging it is to do any sort of medical. And if you've seen pictures from particularly the second strike that's happening there, if you ever see pictures of their fire department, all of their firefighters are dressed like this. It's not because they want to be, it's because the ballistic threat is so frequent, so continuous. I really like this one. She's decided to class it up. She's got little cat ears on the top of her tactical helmet. I like her. But we also have trained, these are nurses. These are actually all cancer nurses. There's oncology nurses. Sorry. But because of how much trauma they're seeing in the hospital setting, they don't know trauma. These are delightful oncology. Most of them are grandparents, but they're seeing a lot more trauma because what happens, just like what happens in shootings here, is if something happens in the city, people go to the closest hospital. And if you're an oncology nurse and a bunch of trauma patients roll in, this is Dr. Susanna, again, the one who's the anesthesiologist. I love this picture. This is actually our tent. We live in here. This is Emily's bed that all these disgusting, sweaty dudes are sitting on. This is where our food was stored. This is the roof of our tent. It was the same on the side that I was sleeping on, so roof of tent, me trying to sleep. It was covered in snow. Bodan's sleeping bag is right here. There was a hole here for the stove that didn't work to vent out of, so snow fell through the hole and onto his face. But she's teaching in like a hip pocket class on pharmacology. Thank you. The actual word for drugs. But literally, these guys just want a little bit of extra instruction. And Dr. Susanna, off time, basically sat with these guys that came to our tent. And this is where how we do and why we do it really matters, because we tend to embed with the guys that we're training. And this is when the actual relationships and the training happens. So these guys all just came to get a little bit of extra instruction, and she spent an hour just going through pharmacology with them. And that's great. That happens quite frequently when we're out there. But these are their realities, and their realities are stark. It does not look anything like what we used to do. This is a trench. As you can see, it's only about as tall as those guys are, and that's a pretty tall one, but it's only about as wide as a man and a half. So again, when you think about having to do things like patient care, your time and your constrictions matter. And there's actual space and time constraints. This is made worse by the fact that there are now drones landing on you pretty much all the time. Ukraine and Russia are really on the front lines, literally, of rapid development of precision battlefield technology. And a lot of that is the drone warfare that I'm sure you've heard about. This is a standard issue Ukrainian IFAK kit. For those of you who are familiar with combat medicine of any kind, this is subpar by a long shot. This is probably a fake tourniquet that either came in from somebody or somebody in there wanting to do good went on Amazon and bought the cheapest ones because there was the most bang for the buck, basically. It sent a bunch out. But they basically get one tourniquet. These are sterile gloves, the kind you are supposed to use if you like put in a Foley or deliver a baby, or but really not for medical use because they tend to come up to your elbow and they're super hard to get on. And then this is a small compression dressing, a pair of kind of old shears, and then what I found most ironic is right underneath this is the list of the things that is supposed to be in there. And so if you check off all the things that are in there, you're still left with quite the list of things that are supposed to be. Again, this is a trench. This is a training exercise. As you can see, this is true of most of the trenches that are far east now. It's about hip deep, which is a kind of a suboptimal operating environment. Similar here, and you can also see the addition of incredibly cold weather. This is a training exercise, but this is a lot what a initial casualty collection point would look like, especially in an urban environment. So you can see it's not very well set up. It's basically just a room in a village. This is a guy coming out of a non-traditional evacuation vehicle. So for those of you who've either been in the back of a Black Hawk or been in an ambulance, there's not really a whole lot of way to do good patient care back there. We also stacked about 6 guys in the back of that. We could barely move, much less take care of other people. And then this is pretty horrific. This is actually the byproduct of not being able to get off the front lines for 5 days with a very small penetrating injury right about here, which is now necrotic, so rotting flesh. And these are actually, this is unintended maggot therapy. I know for those of you who are in the medical field, maggot therapy is like the new hot thing that was also hot back in like the 1600s. But not the unintended kind. Like there's an actual way to develop cultures of disgustingly sterile maggots. But this is the reality. Right now what we're hearing is on the outer end, people may not make it off of the place where they're injured for up to 2 weeks to get any sort of definitive care past that. So again, if you think about the myriad and stacked problems, you have people sitting on injured folks for up to 2 weeks at a time. Most of the people who are doing that don't have a whole lot of experience. Most of the people who are medics are really the person closest to that point of injury. They may not have any medical training. They may have 6 hours. And we know this because we have gone and we've given some of that training, and the commanders have said, if you guys hadn't come, these guys wouldn't have gotten anything before they went to the front. So again, multifactorial problem, and then the constant threat of drones. So if you think about trying to do anything, even type a good email if you're sitting in your cubicle, the threat of a drone every couple minutes makes that significantly harder. So think about that and extrapolate that out to actually having to try and save somebody's life. It's a significant problem. We just like to talk about that because I know there's some folks in here who have donated to us, and I'm very grateful to that. We are a very small 501c3. This is definitely not a fundraising pitch, but we do like to be very transparent in what we do. Because at the end of the day, especially if you've come out of the DoD world, this is a clerical error, usually one made about every second in the DoD. But this is how much it costs to get a team on the ground for about 6 weeks. And that team is usually a number of medics out of the States, a doctor. We do pay our Ukrainian staff. They are the most important part of what we do. Obviously, the knowledge that exists in Kyle's brain and Nick's brain is what needs to come out. But the only way we cross that gap is with people who actually speak the language. Otherwise, there's no knowledge transfer at all. The language gap is significant, especially the farther out east we go. The second biggest thing, and we're very proud of this, is despite our tiny budget, we try and spend about a quarter of that on medical supplies that we then donate. Most of that is bought in country now. So we've purchased about 400, on this trip we purchased 400 tourniquets, 400 chest seals. We had to carry these from the States. For those of you who do know medicine, this is why our bags weigh 800 pounds and it's so hard to carry. I've been really happy when the Ukrainians could start mass producing those. 200 Israeli bandages. These are adorable. They're wrapped and then they're sealed and they're sent to school children who draw little designs on them so that when people have to use them, they can think about all those little school children who helped pack them. It's both heartening and also very, very sad. I think of Ukraine as kind of a cottage industry war in that everybody's doing something, and I think that's a byproduct of only having been free for 34 years. They really want this, and they are all in. And you have people who are like families will be in the village square, like tying camo netting. I've got a really interesting tourniquet that was hand sewn by a woman in a village. I don't know how it works, but I enjoy having it. But literally everybody, every vendor who sells things, a portion of that goes to the military. Literally everyone is all in on this. We also supply 200 needles, 200 gauze, and then a bunch of other stuff that I go to my ambulance service. I know Nick and Kyle both go to folks that we have, and we get as much stuff as we can, and we put it in a duffel bag, and we carry it over. But this is really, shockingly, when we hand this out, this is stuff that we're replacing for a soldier's IFAK kit. This is how they get it. There's no central supply. Most of the time, units are either doing crowdfunding so that they have the money that they need to buy the things that they need. Somebody's got a social media presence. You know, they pick the cutest dude and put him in like a pair of shorts and a t-shirt and like go on social media and raise money for us. But this is literally how it gets done out there. There's really no way for these units to have everything that they need, at least consistently across the entirety of the front. Other units have lots of stuff, and that's, again, one of the interesting things is that there's no kind of commonality from unit to unit. But generally speaking, everybody needs stuff out there, and the way that they're getting it is, generally speaking, somebody like me or us or somebody mails it in from the States, and that's how they get resupply. I can't tell you the number of times when we have resupplied guys who've had nothing for a very long time because they got into some sort of event, they needed to use all their stuff, and they haven't had a chance to get anything else. Our other big cost, despite the fact that we try and keep this really low by living in some interesting housing that Emily and the guys will tell you about later when we have some social time, but generally speaking, we're either in a tent or a team house or something very small. We call it a little bit of quid pro quo. We'll go out to a unit and be like, hey, we'll happily provide you guys free training. We'll do all the things for you. But if you guys have a place for us to stay, that would be great. And generally speaking, that's ended up being like a barn or a tent or this room somewhere or this one with the guy who only wears underpants. Turns out he was like a Supreme Court judge, but he hadn't seen people in a while, and he's just literally wearing underpants. And FaceTiming his family and showing them the Americans that are in his house with him. He was adorable. Travel. One of the things that we've done and feel very strongly about is if you come out with us, we try and take care of everything for you. It's a huge thing that we ask people to do, to leave their families for a couple weeks, 3 weeks at a time. And so a lot of the organizations that are out there are like, yeah, please come out, but you're going to have to pay your own way, pay your own food, pay your own housing. And we try and get around some of that and take care of people. Because ultimately, again, while our interpreters are the most important thing, if I don't have Kyle's knowledge or Emily's knowledge or Nick's knowledge, it really doesn't really matter. So we try and take care of our folks. And the team does like to eat. Vic, if you're watching, this is for you.
Should put snack bag on there.
Right. The bane of my existence is I go to the grocery store every day for an 8-person team, and I come out looking like I'm feeding a football team. And for those of you who've been in Europe or other places in the world where literally people shop every day and they get like 7 items and they come with their basket. There was a time I was in the southern part of the country, and these guys, I ran into town to get stuff for these guys for 2 days, 2 or 3 days. I had 2 carts of stuff that I was pushing through the store, and I'm like spreading people like Moses, like, get out of the way. And you could just see all the cash the people working at the registers looking and like trying to go away, like we're closed, we're closing early. The not so bold predictions for 2025, partly because it's May, partly because we were just there. Hopefully these change, but at this point, we were there during the Easter truce, and I can guarantee you that was not much of an Easter truce. The 30 days that were supposed to be a ceasefire, we had the largest drone attack in Dnipro, there for that one. We were also there for the ballistic missile attack in Kyiv. Both of those things happened during this 30-day truce. One of the things that the Russians did on Easter morning was stop fighting for a couple hours. And then when the Ukrainians all relaxed and they're like, wow, maybe this is actually a truce, and came up out of their hide sites after 2 or 3 hours of truce, then the fighting started again because the Russians could then identify where they were. We will probably see a continual strike on civilian targets because one of the horrible things that happened was one of the agreements in this last peace deal was to not strike the energy infrastructure anymore, which the Russians have actually honored. But in doing so, they've just started launching ballistic missiles and drones into apartment complexes instead. But at least they're holding true to the letter of the agreement. The real problem here, and one of the things that we talk about, and I know that hopefully things are changing here, but there's no easy or obvious off-ramp to this thing. When we think about kind of how in track both sides are at this point, Ukraine has some very, very specific demands, and a lot of those demands go back to sovereignty and the desire to get all of Ukraine back pre-2014, to include Crimea. And that seems to have kind of been a non-starter. For the Russians, though, if you think about how much they have sunk into this and how they come away with this and say that it was any sort of victory. So we were there in the fall of 2022, and that was when Russia kind of had this farcical referendum where they said Crimea and the Donbass and parts of Kherson, those are all ours now. We've had a vote and they're ours. I was like, well, maybe that is the saving face. Like we've sliced a little bit more off Ukraine, and that's what we're going to go with. And then the fighting kept going. And it doesn't make, for those of us who kind of look at things strategically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, how does Russia possibly hold, even if they took more of Ukraine, when we watch their ability or inability, to be more specific, to hold the territory that they've got now and resupply it, how do you possibly hold a country that, again, is so long, so wide, and it really doesn't want you there? We've got some examples in our recent history for how hard those are. Ukraine is probably going to be continued to be barred from joining NATO. I mean, the heartening thing in all of this is that while the U.S. is not a very serious partner right now, Europe very much is, and Europe is very committed to what is going on. And it's very interesting. I was at a NATO meeting in October, obviously before our election here, and you listen to, in my old life, I didn't deal much with NATO. Most of it was either directly within the U.S. or sometimes a few partnered nations. You want to hear the Poles talk about this problem? Oh, they see it much differently than we do, right? Like Ukraine is their backyard, and the Poles have seen this happen before. They're not all about that anymore. And so the Poles and a lot of the NATO partners are very, very serious about what's going on. But in the near term, the training and resupply initiatives are going to continue to fall to small, kind of non-traditional, non-governmental actors, people like us. So we'll be going back in the fall. So yeah, this is kind of what we look to be continuing to do. I really love talking about the training that we provide because it is one of the things that we really decided early on was that there had to be a way to provide advanced pre-hospital trauma medicine, because at that time there were a lot of people out there teaching the basics of hemorrhage control, but there was very few people out there teaching field expedient ultrasound. And that's something that we've, among other groups, one of the things that we've brought in. And for those of you who came up in the health field and who started doing this like my parents did back in the 70s, this is an iPhone, and there's an ultrasound on it. And that's incredible. Like the fact that you could have a small portable ultrasound device and do, in this case, a rapid trauma exam and see the images on your smartphone is, to me, it's pretty incredible technology. The other thing that we do a lot of is blood far forward. We know blood in trauma is a game changer. This is us actually doing a blood transfusion and auto transfusion. Where Brett, this is after he passed out. We got him back up off the ground. He's getting his blood back, but it's literally just being hung on the side of the 2-room house that we're staying in the middle of the Donbass. one of the interesting things about this house is, Brett's heard this talk. And Brett's heard talks similar to this a number of times, probably 4 or 5 times. I've gone down to where he and Kyle work, and I've given a talk like this, and I've tried to explain how different like an artillery war is and what that sounds like. Because we've been in a previous trip, Emily and I and a couple other folks who are not here, we're within about 8 kilometers from the active front, and it was just constant artillery just raining in, and you were like, at what point, what are they even shooting at anymore? And you can't imagine anything. And I'd said that in front of Brett a number of times, and then this house is actually just north of Dobropilia, which is about 20 kilometers off the active front lines right now. Pokrovsk being the city that's being fought over, a place where we used to have a safe house. Guy in the underpants, that was his. But we can't go there anymore because Dobropilia has basically been reduced to rubble, and a lot of places that we used to go don't exist anymore. But I took Brett, and Brett's been in some places, and he's seen some things, and I took him out there, and there was a 70-degree arc near us, and you could see the fighting and hear it going on. And you'd usually start about 8 o'clock at night, and it would go on until about 10 o'clock in the morning, just continuous artillery, explosion after explosion. And Brett looks at me and goes, I've heard you talk about this. I could have never imagined it as bad as it is. And that's our optic 20 kilometers back. Now imagine that if you're in the fight itself. But I love our little safe house. This was in a little hamlet of about 5 houses. The best thing was just behind this safe house, there was a war trophy sauna, which if you're going to be on or near the front lines, war trophy sauna is critical. I wish I had a picture of it. But it was basically a big truck that they had seized from a Russian officer and stolen, which I loved. But in the truck, it had a washing machine, which is critical. Also, if you're on the front lines, because we had at least 2 events where I may or may not have soiled myself a little bit out here. And then it had a shower, and then the very last room was a no kidding sauna, wood-fired sauna. And you could sit in it at night, and it was great. And the fact that it was a war trophy just made it all that much better. I was picturing the Russian officer who was sad somewhere because he didn't have a sauna anymore, and I was sitting in it. My good friend Bogdan. This again is our tent. This is another one of the places we've stayed in, and will probably be kind of how we continue to do things in the future. This is in a training base that hopefully still exists by the time we get back. But we'll continue to do what we do. So we provide, again, that Moscow. This is in the basement of a place in Kharkiv with a TACMED team. These guys, they're all civilian. They work kind of under the auspices of the Kharkiv Police Department. This is our friend Sergey, who comes to all of our classes. He's on his phone the entire time. Sergey, if you're watching. But these folks respond to missile strikes in civilian buildings, and they usually do so at great peril because of the second strike capability. But these are literally just civilians who go into missile strikes and try and find other people and keep them alive until the actual DSNS, which is their emergency service. So just incredible folks all across the country. This is part of the cohort that lives here at this base. These are kind of what they consider to be dedicated medics. So these guys come from various units. They get 30 days of actual medical instruction. And so these are kind of the guys that are expected to do the most real hands-on medical work. But this guy, he's somewhere in this picture. So this guy right here, he was telling us that he was one of 24 guys that survived out of his unit of 400. And he wasn't sure how he made it out. But one of the rewards was that he got to come and kind of decompress, be at this thing for the 30 days. So just real tragedy across the entire thing. This is us teaching an advanced airway in the dark under red light somewhere. I love closing with the people that really make this thing happen, and this is the team. And we talked about most of these folks. This is the every morning formation, and this is something that we've continued and we've adopted. But in Ukraine, at 9 o'clock every morning, they have a moment of silence, and it's a full minute where a clock ticks, and then they play the national anthem. And one of the things that was really neat was we were at this part of the base, and there were other units in different parts of the base, and not everyone was synchronous. And so you could hear this thing kind of resonating in different areas at different times. But they allowed us to stand with them and be part of that, and we actually kept that going. And one of the guys that we saw later on, after we were doing this away from here, we went and taught a different course. We kept it in on that course. And at the very end of the class, we said, what was the thing you liked the most? What did you not like about the class? What should we change? And he said, of all the things out of 10 days of what we taught, we did all these really cool things. We did ultrasounds, blood, and all these things, exercises. He said the thing that he liked the most was this. And the reason he liked it was because he couldn't believe that Americans would care about Ukrainian lives. And he was so moved by the fact that we as Americans would stand with them for their national anthem and prioritize it. It meant more to him than anything else he'd learned in that 10 days. And that guy's probably going back to the front soon, if he's not already. Have you heard from him lately?
Yeah, he's already there.
Yeah, he's on the front. I like showing this picture a lot. This is us. We have just come out of the Donbass, so out in the very far east. We were in Dnipro. Did you ever get to Dnipro?
Mm-hmm.
Have you gone to River Sword Meat, like the shashlik restaurant right on the river?
I didn't go to the shashlik restaurant, but I.
Well, you need to go back to Dnipro.
Fair.
All right,
Fair.
when you go back to Dnipro.
Yeah.
This place has amazing food, but you can see we're all a little bit shell-shocked because we've just come out of the Donbass. And coming out of the Donbass is like coming out of the foothills of the Himalayas in like the 1980s or out of Java in 1970. You're just like, shit, there are a lot of people here and there are lights and life is very normal. Very, very normal. This is a big walking area. It's beautiful. The sunset right behind us. People are out having dinner. They're out on dates. They're out having drinks. Very accidentally, over the last 2 days, we've been shot at twice in this picture. And so a lot of us are just like, I can't believe that happened, especially people that have been shot at before, which is kind of everybody in the front of this picture. So there was a lot of mental processing going on. About 3 hours after this picture was taken, Bodan and I were taking Yulia to the train station to get her on the train to come out, and the drones started coming in. And we had the largest drone attack in Dnipro since the war started. About 24 200-pound warheads were able to get through the air defense system because of the continual degradation of that system because we are not supporting them. But about 24 200-pound warheads landed within a few blocks of where this picture was taken about 3 hours after. We were very fortunate. Unfortunate, I mean, the thing that has been degraded is the air defense system. What has not been degraded is the early warning system. So literally, almost as soon as Bodan and I are in the car, he's driving, I'm sitting shotgun, Yulia's in the back seat, I get an air alert on my phone. Because it's awesome. They have that air alert on your phone and you have amazing real-time data of what's happening. Unfortunately, that real-time data told me that there were lots of shitheads and they were coming right towards where we were. And so I'm trying to get in touch with the team who's now in the hotel. And poor Yulia, who lives in Dnipro with 2 roommates and a dog in basically a small apartment that doubles as a yoga studio. About right before we pulled into the train station, the first drone started to hit, and they hit right behind us. Vic, who's standing here, who has been in Ukraine, she's Ukrainian. She's the one who's a teacher, and who's probably the one who doesn't want to go back to what she used to do, teaching like 7th graders. She literally said she heard one go past her window, and then she started to move. And they all got downstairs. So they're sheltering in the hotel. The 3 of us are in the train station, which once we got across the parking lot was probably one of the safer places we could have been because we were on the ground. And then poor Yulia was just in her home with her 2 roommates, trying to hold their dogs and trying not to freak out about how close these things were. Her house got shaken a number of times. Bodan and I, literally, her train was supposed to leave at 10. Everyone. And this is how you know it's bad in Ukraine, is when everyone's sheltering. Most of the time, no one's sheltering. They're looking at you like, this is an everyday thing. This was not an everyday thing. And so we literally waited until the very last minute. I run up, I see that the train is there, I come back down. We literally pick her up and throw her on the train and get her out of there. And then we ended up waiting a few more minutes. At the same time, these 2 are coming in and feel like they're coming in from Poland and watching all this. And that feeling of helplessness of my team is there and something bad is happening and I can't do anything. And that's a horrible way to feel. But again, that's just the reality. Like this went from very nice, very peaceful team dinner. Like we're out of the Donbass. The threat is a lot more manageable now. But one of those drones hit just about a kilometer up this way, went right into the door of a restaurant. This is the team in Kharkiv, which is a town, it's the second largest city in Ukraine, which is absolutely getting crushed with missiles and drones and stuff. This is us doing a training. This is right after we've done their last training there. As you guys can see, we wear our kit a lot. Most of the time, it's because this is what they have to wear, and this is how they do their work. And so part of it is solidarity. Like, I'm not going to ask somebody to show up to training wearing 40 pounds of gear if I'm not going to wear 40 pounds of gear. But the other thing is we're trying to emphasize to them how important it is to learn how to operate around your new environment. Because everything about putting this on changes every dimension of the person wearing it. Changes your center of gravity, changes your ability to move. And unfortunately, we've had many times where people have realized that they cannot actually do the things that they may need to do with all of this stuff on. And we had one kid, and Emily can talk more about this later, but we were doing just a very simple self-application tourniquet drill. And he realized he could not reach across his kit to reach his arm to put his tourniquet on if he needed to. And while I'm glad we learned that in the austere training or in a regular training environment, that's just the reality out there, is that ill-fitting kit, people aren't used to it. They're doing the best they can with what they've got, but sometimes they just don't train the way they need to, and that comes back and hurts people. Kyle and the folks in Colorado kind of introduced this concept. We like to keep a little bit fun when we do our last exercise. So we all get Hawaiian shirts. Kyle found some that had the Ukrainian Tizub on them, or actually got these made for us. So these are our very unique team shirts. When we do our very last exercise, it's a multi-hour, very stressful thing for the people. And so for this, it kind of keeps it a little bit more lighthearted, but it also allows them to identify who we are when they're freaking out, or when one of our role players is freaking out. They can pretty easily identify us. So it kind of serves a couple of purposes. I just want to talk about the folks again in the picture. That's Brett. He works with Kyle in Colorado Springs, just an amazing paramedic. That's Susanna. You can always tell who she is because she generally has her eyes shut in the pictures. She's doing very well in these ones. Again, Victoria, who we might as well just call Snack Bag. Victoria's awesome. Kyle over there. Yulia, the one who lives in Dnipro, has been with us since 2024.
23, something. She's been with us a long time.
Emily, another amazing paramedic. Bodan is probably one of my favorite people in the world. He's just this incredible human being. Really, really believes in Ukraine and what they stand for, and wants us to believe it too, which is hard not to when you're with him. He's just infectious in his enthusiasm. This is another tradition that we have, which actually started after one of our teammates left. We dropped him off at the Dnipro train station, and a bunch of us who were still there after we dropped him off, we went and got ice cream. We seemed a little bit celebratory, and we were like, oh, this doesn't look good. Like he left, and then we got ice cream. So we made sad ice cream. And so this is a tradition that we now have. This is actually after the either first or second day of nearly getting shot. We stopped and got sad ice cream because you should be sad after you've survived. But this is a tradition that we have. It's probably gotten a little bit out of control because now sad ice cream happens like after any training ends or it's like those are legit. But now it's like
as a kid.
yeah, now it's like
You can't get Mexican after you do the rescue stuff, so you might as well get ice cream.
yeah, but now it's become like, oh, it's Tuesday. We haven't had ice cream since yesterday, so I'm sad about that. So it's kind of taking on a life of its own. But this is ice cream that we got in a small village in the Donbass somewhere, so at least those things still exist out there. But really, who I wanted to point out was Yulia. This is our mental health specialist who, love her, Yulia, if you're listening, you were awesome. She also had matching pajamas and curled her hair and put on makeup every day while we were in the Donbass. She was amazing because, again, she grew up in Ukraine. She's from a Ukrainian village. But one of the things that we talked, she's lived in the States for a while now. But one of the things we talked about was we do things austere. And I'm not entirely sure austere in her mind was the same as what it is in mine. And I'm sure the team will tell you that what I accept is okay and what the rest of humanity accepts is okay are kind of on two different wavelengths. So in my mind, I was like, wow, we are indoors. Plus, we've got a war trophy sauna. Very nice. The cook that was actually here. The military cook had been a chef in his previous life, so he was a very good cook and never let us down. But we literally, we had a shower, we were indoors, we were relatively safe given the conditions. So to me, that was great.
And we had a toilet.
Yeah, an outdoor toilet with 3 sides that were plastic, but a styrofoam seat, so it never got cold.
That's perfect.
But if Brett were here, he would tell you that that was the place he thought he was going to die. And that's just not where you want it to happen. But on our very last morning, so we've already had a small training incident that I've referenced a couple times. It almost didn't end well. But on our last morning there, we're all getting ready to go. Brett has decided that this is the time he's going to go and visit the toilet one more time. So he's in there. And all of a sudden we hear something we almost never hear out there, and it's a helicopter. Mike can attest. Like, when was the last time you heard anything fly in Ukraine? Never. Airspace is closed. I think I've had a MiG come overhead a couple times, but I think I've seen a helicopter like over there a couple times. And I'm standing by the car, a couple of us are standing by the car, and I hear this thing, and then you see it like literally come up over the tree line, and then you see the missile pods. You're like, oh, huh? There's nowhere to go. I mean, there are 5 houses, and there's a field behind me. Well, it was worse for Brett. Because he's literally sitting there in the eye line of the pilot as they come up over the tree line. And he's sitting there watching this thing, and they're probably watching him. And his decision point was, do I run into one of the 5 buildings, which are probably going to get targeted, or do I run out in the field with my pants off and probably get targeted out there? So his decision was to stay put. Unfortunately, as this thing goes past, you see the Ukrainian flag, and then the huge Ukrainian flag get painted on the door. But it's only flying at about 150 feet, and you're like, that thing is close. And it's right overhead. But Yulia was absolutely fantastic. She played an amazing role in what we do, and actually a big gap in what we do, which is we provide hands-on advanced pre-hospital medical, but the mental health piece is not something we've ever been able to touch before. And she really, really helped out with that, because that's what she does. Again, she grew up in Ukraine. She speaks Ukrainian. And so just a huge asset. And this is our friend, Dr. Steve. Very appropriate that he's in his shorts. This is Dr. Steve's signature look. Usually there's sandals on, but this is Dr. Steve's signature look.
No,
Dr. Steve
doesn't have his backwards hat on.
No backwards hat. But again, just a fantastic doctor. And when you look at across the litany of, and Kendra and folks who've been out there can attest, you see all kinds in Ukraine. The people who are truly dedicated, the people who want to be there, the people who are there for their own stories, and everything in between. You want to talk about a true friend of Ukraine, like Dr. Steve is it. He moved out there in March of 2023. He works in a lot of the hospitals. He is trying to make the residents and that second health, or that kind of definitive care piece better. So while we do the pre-hospital stuff, he's really focusing on how do I make these young doctors better? Because there are some huge impediments to that, as you might imagine. The hospital system there is still very bureaucratic in nature. You've got a lot of very, very good, very young doctors who come up kind of post-Soviet era, well-educated, speak English, want to make changes because they see problems. And he's really helping mentor a lot of them. Just a fantastic friend of Ukraine. And I think that's everybody. I don't think I've missed anybody. But this is the team, and they're just some of the best. They are the best people I know. Like, if we could take the goodness and the empathy, both for each other and for the team and for Ukraine, and bottle it, like this is the secret sauce. And there's really nothing more to it than caring about people and caring about things that are bigger than yourself. This will be a little hard, but we would be remiss in not mentioning folks that are like us and who live in the same space. Did you know Swampy?
Yeah.
Yep, sure. Everybody in Ukraine either knew Swampy or knew of him. Chris was kind of a self-made EOD expert. He was killed in a demining accident on the 6th of May, so just a couple days ago. He's been in Ukraine since 2014, then left for a while to do some stuff with Burma, and then came back when 3 days after the invasion at the end of February of 2022. Has been just a fixture in Ukraine. Like I said, anybody who's either been there anybody who's been there either knows Chris directly or knew of him. We interacted with him and his part, so he DoD stuff his partner does, kind of the ambulance side, with an organization called Prevail, and they run Casevac and medevac stuff basically way out of that northeast corner of the country, and they are always looking for medics and medical folks. So his partner Courtney runs that side of it. I mean, we've run pretty closely with Chris and his team because of where we go. And on our last trip back in March, I reached out to Chris and I was like, hey, this is where we're going to be, and can I use you as an emergency contact? And the reason I asked Chris is because I knew that if something happened to my team, he would come. Did a lot of stuff. They did a lot of stuff specifically in Kharkiv when there were missile strikes. They would be some of the first responders there. They literally just staged an ambulance and then would just go based on where things were happening. So huge loss. He was killed with another guy named Nick doing some mine clearing in the Izium area, which is kind of a little bit out to the east. But just a huge loss to the Ukrainian community, and also really emphasizes the danger of some of the stuff that we do. Everybody thought Chris was invincible. Despite what he did, everybody thought that Chris was the kind of guy who continued to just do it forever. But the other thing that this highlights is, while he's wearing a British flag, this is a non-official human being out there doing the work that needs to be done. So outside the confines of the official response, without the auspices of the British government, and I can guarantee you, if he'd been hurt badly instead of killed, the British government would have told him that it was too bad that he was there and he got hurt on his head. And I could say that with a lot of confidence because somebody else I saw right before we left was a kid named Eddie. And Eddie was targeted driving an ambulance by a drone, and then a munition came in right behind the driver's seat and took Eddie's leg at just below the hip and his arm at the shoulder. Eddie was lucky in that the person riding next to him was able to get around to him and stop the bleeding, and they, because of where they were and because they had a Casevac vehicle with them, they were able to get him to a trauma center within about an hour and a half, even though they turned away from the first one because he was a civilian. And they saved Eddie's life. But when Eddie's friends went to the British Embassy and said, this is what happened, British Embassy said, I'm really sorry to hear that, but you weren't supposed to be in Ukraine in the first place. And so there's a lot of this kind of stuff happening where you have these non-traditional actors trying to fill the gaps that are being left by the people who should be there in an ideal situation. The real aid community, the DoD, people who should be doing mine clearance. Shouldn't be a guy who's self-taught in Myanmar, but there's nobody else I'd rather see out there. And we'll really miss Chris and his team, and we hope that they are able to continue to do the work they do. But this is a huge loss, but it's along the lines of when Pete Reed was killed. And so that's really all I had on the formal side. What I would ask and invite folks to do is we got team folks up here who can come answer some questions. You've heard plenty from me, or we can just kind of mingle and grab snacks and drinks, and we can answer all your questions on the side. If you're ever interested in what we do, you can shoot me an email. We have an email distro that goes out. One of the things I love about how small we are is literally that email comes from me. And if you hate it, don't want to be on it, you just email me and say, please stop emailing me. But this is really just a way that we send stuff out to people who follow us and people who support us. And we send out mission briefs and kind of what we're up to and where we are. This is the larger foundation, the Força Foundation. Just to give a brief plug on that. Because they're very upset with me right now, so I want to stay in their good graces. But the Força Foundation is a North Carolina-based 501c3. It's run by my best friend, male best friend.
Good fit, good fit.
Who I went to college with, and conveniently I sit on the board too. And so Johnny asked me to be on the board, and the Força Foundation basically has a very ambiguous mission statement of like, let's just go make the world better, and kind of one person at a time. And most of the time we do like microloan stuff in North Carolina, in the western part of North Carolina. And mostly for people who've like lost their trailer in a flood or stuff like that. And we, generally speaking, we're operating on like $10,000 microloan budget. And I went to the rest of the board and said, hey, is it cool if we slide a Ukraine healthcare effort under that? And they approved it. And now our treasurer really wants to put me through the ringer because even though our budget's not huge, it's a lot more than $10,000. And now we have to have like accountability for the IRS and stuff. And Emily does an amazing job of keeping us straight on the books. as I give her every single receipt for everything we spent money on in Ukraine.
That's okay.
But the Força Foundation also has educational opportunity. We fund educational opportunities out of Africa. We still do a lot of stuff in North Carolina. One of the ironies was when we were in country last fall, August, September, October trip, and that was when Hurricane Helene